In this lecture, we will trace the feminist movement over the course of its existence, known popularly as the different waves of feminism. In essence, the waves of feminism seek to analyze the trajectory of modern feminism by subdividing the feminist movement into several time frames, starting in the late 19th century with the fight for women's suffrage, up to the plurality of movements coexisting in our current day. The concept was popularized by a 1968 New York Times article by Martha Lear, in which she distinguished the feminist movement of her time, the second wave, from the previous generation of activists. Before we delve into them, I want to share a common debate that has emerged in the use of this wave metaphor. How many waves of feminism are there? Which one are we riding right now? Do we even need this categorization? Are the different waves strict categories, or is there an overlap? What are your thoughts? Let's jump into the different waves now. The first wave, 1848 to 1920, refers to the West's first sustained political movement dedicated to achieving political equality for women, the suffragettes of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The first wave began with the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, where almost 200 women met in a church in upstate New York to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and rights of women. Attendees discussed their grievances and passed a list of 12 resolutions calling for specific equal rights, including, after much debate, the right to vote. In 1920, Congress passed the 19th Amendment granting the women the right to vote. In theory, it granted the right to women of all races, but in practice, it remained difficult for black women to vote, especially in the South. The second wave, 1963 to the 1980s. This wave of feminism began with the consciousness rising groups of the late 1950s and early 1960s. Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique, which was published in 1963, helped define the problem with no name that many middle-class, primarily white American housewives were experiencing. This problem went to the core of women's self-worth and the lack of identity in the public world of paid labor and their definition of self, primarily as wives and mothers in the private realm of the family. There were prominent feminist thinkers before Friedan who would be associated with the second wave. Most importantly, Simone de Beauvoir, whose Second Sex came out in France in 1949 and in the US in 1953. The second wave worked on enhancing women's access to finances and financial decision-making, such as through the right to hold credit cards under their names and to apply for mortgages. Additionally, it worked to outlaw marital rape, raise awareness about domestic violence, and build shelters for women fleeing rape and domestic violence. It worked to name and legislate against sexual harassment in the workplace. As the women's movement developed, it was rooted in the anti-capitalist and anti-racist civil rights movements. Still, black women increasingly found themselves alienated from the central platforms of the mainstream women's movement. For instance, earning the right to work outside the home was not a major concern for black women who had to work outside the home anyway. While black women and white women both advocated for reproductive freedom, black women wanted to fight not just for the right to contraception and abortions, but also to stop forced sterilization of people of color and people with disabilities, which was not a priority for the mainstream women's movement. In response, some black feminists decamped from feminism to create womanism. The third wave began in the 1990s with the Anita Hill case of 1991 as a distinctive movement contributing to the feminist movement's upsurge. Anita Hill, an African-American law professor, testified about facing sexual harassment by the Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas, marking one of the earliest public debates on workplace harassment. Furthermore, the third wave is characterized by an increasing awareness of intersectionality, a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in the 80s. It recognized the interwoven forms of discrimination, of racism, classism, ableism, and more, and also criticized the second wave for primarily representing the demands of the white, cis, straight, middle-class women and leaving out those of the others. Philosopher Judith Butler is also considered a central figure of the third wave as she defends the differentiation between sex and gender, strengthening the support of trans rights. Lastly, riot girl music groups emerged, giving rise to punk feminism and contrasting the previous wave with a reclamation of femininity. The main attribute of the fourth wave is its relationship to the media and its online advocacy for social change. This means that it promotes feminist causes on the internet, especially on social media, with campaigns against rape culture and body shaming, or hashtags like MeToo or Yes All Women. This has led to the transformation of pop culture resonating with young girls, women, and minority genders worldwide, giving rise to young activist online spaces. While the fourth wave supports the features of the third, it is argued that it goes a step further in terms of sex and body positivity, as well as reinforcing women's empowerment. The fifth wave is the most controversial since there is much debate on whether it exists and its main features. Proponents claim that this wave was created around 2015 with fake news, trolls, and online harassment gaining momentum. This is said to have worked as a wake-up call demanding a stronger alliance between feminist groups and work towards action-oriented activism. The preceding movement is portrayed as more individualistic and personal, while the fifth wave is more concentrated on large-scale change-making. But a lot of these universally facilitated waves are Western centric. What has feminism looked like in other regions of the world? I now invite you to make waves of feminism timeline for your own region. Mark out important events. Find out who were the important figures during this wave for your location. And ask yourself, how does this look different from the feminism in the West? And how do we diversify the waves of feminism to make it more inclusive?